Welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. A debate about our country's history and who should be commemorated has gripped the country. Protests by UCC students to have the statue of Cecil John Rhodes removed from the campus sparked similar protests at other universities. Some universities, for example, have named Rhodes University. Question of a statue of a white imperialist, it is argued, has no place at an African university. Many have backed the movement. Others have criticized the protest as a superficial attempt at achieving transformation at universities. The truth about it is, finally, we're now having a debate about how history should be negotiated, encountered, and dealt with in South Africa. And that is really an important question, bearing in mind, as they say, that a constitution, if it is an autobiography of the nation, means that history actually has a really important place to play in this particular debate. Now, if you want to participate in this debate on Twitter, please use the hashtag JFYHistory. In the studio tonight, to deal with the questions, we have Mzukisi Qobo, author and political analyst, Jacques Stolz from the Heritage Association of South Africa, and Floyd Shivhambu, the Deputy President of the EFF. Let me start with you, Floyd. Yes. I'm just intrigued. All of a sudden, we've got this debate has exploded. Why now?
No, look, well, from the EFF, you know that when the president of the EFF gave his maiden speech in Parliament, since the EFF was elected in Parliament, part of the clarion call he made there was to say that let us have all the colonial apartheid statutes removed in South African society because they represent the conquest of our people, or the conquest of the black majority by the colonial settlers. And he said that they continue to represent white supremacy, that the fact that our people were defeated, and to begin a process of eroding white supremacy and the colonial conquest of our people, we should, as part of the interventions, remove all the colonial and apartheid statutes that decorate most of our cities, institutions of higher learning, and other important public spaces. So
now,
that is what we made a call about.
When you say remove them, would you want them thrown away? Would you want them put in a museum? How would you want to deal with this question of history?
They should be relegated to the dustbin of history, or maybe put in the museum, the apartheid museums and other museums, so that generations to come will know that the country we call South Africa today came about because of many events which included the colonial conquest by certain colonizers and settlers who have shaped our country towards a different direction. Obviously, the coming generation should know of who Cecil John Rhodes is. They must be told the full story that he was a colonial murderer who forced the African majority into wage labor in the mines and all those other things. But that should be in the museums, maybe in the textbooks as well, but not in the public spaces in a way of celebrating.
All right. So that's the issue, as I understand it. I think Floyd summarized that quite well. I mean, in a way, what do you do with these things? I mean, if I take him correctly, he can correct me if I'm wrong, he always does, but the point is that it's not as if you're going to ignore the history. It's the question of what you do in relation to encounter that history.
Precisely, but I think an important point that's got to be stressed is that this issue is not just about statues, but it's about meanings, it's about intellectual traditions, it's about philosophical outlook. And in the context of Rhodes statue and many other statues, it's also about the hoisting of white social power. Because if you put a statue in a prominent place, what you are saying or suggesting is that you admire these figures of history, you admire what they stood for. For an example, you would not find Hitler's statue in prominent places in Germany. And figures such as Rhodes and many others are an offense, an abomination to black people in particular.
So, I mean, you wouldn't find, let me try to re-put the point, picking up. If, for example, the Germans decided tomorrow morning that they were going to have a statue of Hitler in a prominent place in Berlin, the outcry would be extraordinary.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Jewish community would go berserk. They'd say, well, what are you doing? Are you mad?
Absolutely.
So, in a way, have we not been grossly insensitive that 20 years after democracy, we still got these things in a decontextualized way?
Yes, and certainly I think the University of Cape Town, as with many other universities, have been found to be sleeping, because that's precisely the call that's made in the National Heritage Resources Act, is a call for the heritage sector to transform. And those values of transformation and social justice are embedded in our heritage legislation.
How do you define transformation? It's such a woolly word. What do we
case,
mean here?
right.
Viewers watching us say, what do you mean?
So the National Heritage Act sets out what it defines the national estate, which forms the bulk of our shared heritage. And that includes buildings and spaces that are significant, graves, monuments, etc.
So what does it want us to do? What do you want us to do with statues like roads?
Right, so one of the key principles, and that's where our legislation differs from the old apartheid legislation, which was the old National Monuments Act, where the national government basically decided what are national monuments or not.
And now?
The difference here is that the Act calls upon communities and organizations like academic institutions to identify what their heritage is that they hold in their collections or statues or public memorials.
But our heritage
and then begin to engage with affected communities and stakeholders as to what the future should be.
All right.
So,
I got you.
To some extent, I agree with the analogy with Hitler. But at the same time, Germany, to this day, is battling with issues of what to do with Nazi-era buildings, structures, war-damaged art collections. It's not something that they've left behind. It's still a legacy.
And don't we have to do that? I mean, that's our history, damn it. I mean, it's not your fault or my fault that Rhodes was a bloody colonialist of the worst vicious order. But he's part of our history. That's what shaped. We've got to reconstruct our society thanks to people like him.
Now look, the symbolic significance of statues in public spaces is to celebrate and commemorate the significance of the individual who has been put there, to say that this is a great human being who contributed to positive.
Does it have to be that?
That is how statues are understood all over the world. So South Africa is still having statues of Paul Kruger in Pretoria, of Lou Botha in in front of Parliament.
Right, in Parliament, yes.
Yes, in front of Parliament, and of Cecil John Rhodes in UCT. A whole university in Grahamstown is named after Rhodes, and whose contribution to our society has never been constructive. I mean, like, society has now come to a consensus.
I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to argue. I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to argue that Rhodes is constructive. I think the question is, how does one engage with him, because he's so deeply imbricated in our history?
No, look, that's why we say that, okay, let us have the statues elsewhere.
In a museum.
In a museum and everything.